The jungle was silent, too silent. Sergeant Cole knew that was never a good sign. The wind barely moved the leaves, and even the usual buzzing of insects had disappeared. Something was wrong. He tightened his grip on his rifle and glanced at his squad. 5 soldiers, all battle-hardened, waited for his signal. They were deep in enemy territory, and their mission was simple: secure an abandoned human outpost and hold the position until reinforcements arrived. Private Diaz adjusted the heavy X900 minigun strapped to his back. The weapon was a monster, capable of firing 3,000 rounds per minute, and it was their biggest advantage. If the enemy attacked, Diaz could cut them down before they even got close. But Cole knew that firepower wasn't everything. The Gorvaks were hunters, killers, and cruel warriors. If they were here, they weren't just going to charge in blindly. They were waiting for the right moment, just like the humans. As they moved forward, the team saw the old outpost in the distance. It was a small, rusted structure, barely standing after years of neglect. The metal walls were covered in vines, and the communication tower had collapsed. But it was still an important strategic position. If the Gorvaks took it, they could launch attacks on human settlements nearby. Cole wasn't going to let that happen. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the jungle. Laughter. It was deep, guttural, and filled with amusement. It came from the trees, from the shadows, from everywhere. The Gorvaks were watching them. They weren't attacking yet. They were mocking them. Private Lewis swallowed hard. "They know we're here," he whispered. Cole nodded. He wasn't surprised. The Gorvaks loved to play with their prey. They didn't just kill. They enjoyed it. They wanted the humans to feel fear before they struck. But fear wasn't an option. Cole had seen too many battles to let an alien's laughter shake him. "Stay sharp," he ordered. "Diaz, get that minigun ready. If they want to laugh, we'll give them something to cry about." The team moved closer to the outpost, weapons raised. The laughter continued, growing louder, filling the air like a storm about to break. Then, without warning, it stopped. And the jungle exploded with gunfire. Bright red plasma bolts rained down from the trees as Gorvaks warriors revealed themselves. They were massive creatures, covered in thick, spiked armor, their eyes glowing like fire in the darkness. They roared as they charged, weapons blazing. "Cover!" Cole shouted, diving behind a fallen tree. The squad reacted instantly, firing back. Bullets ripped through the air, but the Gorvaks kept coming. Their armor was strong, and it took multiple hits to bring one down. Diaz set up the X900 minigun, his hands moving fast. "Cover me for 5 seconds," he yelled. "Make it 3. Cole shouted back. Private Baker threw a grenade, and it exploded in the middle of the enemy charge, sending bodies flying. The shockwave gave Diaz the opening he needed. The minigun roared to life. The air filled with the deafening sound of metal tearing through flesh. The Gorvaks warriors who had been laughing moments ago were now screaming. The minigun's bullets tore through their armor, sending blood spraying into the jungle. The ground shook from the sheer force of the weapon. But the enemy didn't stop. More of them rushed in, determined to overwhelm the humans with numbers. Cole knew they had to move. "Fall back to the outpost," he ordered. The team ran, firing as they moved. Plasma bolts whizzed past them, burning the air. Private Lewis cried out as a bolt grazed his shoulder, but he kept running. The outpost was their only chance to hold out. The moment they reached the entrance, Cole slammed the control panel, locking the doors behind them. The squad panted, catching their breath. Outside, the Gorvaks roared in frustration, banging on the walls. Diaz wiped sweat from his forehead. That was close. Cole nodded. "Yeah, and it's not over yet." The enemy was outside, waiting. They wouldn't leave until they had what they came for. The metal walls of the outpost vibrated as the Gorvaks pounded against them. Their roars echoed in the small, rusted structure, making it clear they had no intention of leaving. The squad had bought themselves a few minutes, but not much more. Sergeant Cole scanned the room. The old human outpost was falling apart. Dust covered the floors, the lights flickered weakly, and the walls were scared from past battles. But it was still a strong position, better than fighting in the open jungle. The doors were reinforced steel, thick enough to hold for a little while. "Check your ammo," Cole ordered. "We're not out of this yet." Private Diaz wiped sweat from his face, his hand still gripping the X900 minigun. The weapon had done its job outside, cutting down dozens of Gorvaks, but more had come. They always did. "They're pissed," Diaz muttered. "You hear that?" Cole nodded. The enemy wasn't laughing anymore. Their amusement had turned into rage. The humans had ruined their little game. Now the Gorvaks wanted blood. Private Lewis winced as he checked his wounded shoulder. "They'll break through eventually." "What's the plan?" "Sarge." Cole glanced at the control panel. The security system was fried. No cameras, no automated defenses, nothing. They were on their own. But he had fought the Gorvaks before. He knew how they thought. They loved overwhelming their enemies with brute force, but they weren't stupid. If they couldn't break the doors, they'd find another way in. "They'll hit the ventilation shafts or blast a hole in the walls," Cole said. "Diaz, Baker, set up defenses here at the main door. Lewis, Jackson, check the vents. If they get inside, we're dead." The team moved fast. Baker and Diaz stacked crates and debris to form a makeshift barricade. Diaz positioned the minigun, aiming it directly at the door. If the Gorvaks broke through, they'd walk straight into hell. Lewis and Jackson checked the vents. The metal grates were rusted, but still in place. Jackson frowned. "They're big, but if they send in smaller scouts first, we won't see it coming." "Then we make sure they don't get the chance," Lewis said, tossing a grenade inside one of the shafts. A loud explosion shook the outpost. Then everything went silent. Cole's eyes narrowed. The Gorvaks had been roaring in anger moments ago. Now they were quiet. That wasn't good. Silence meant they were planning something. Them. A loud explosion shook the outpost. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. The Gorvaks had found another way in. "They're coming through the west wall," Jackson shouted. Cole turned just in time to see a massive armored Gorvaks warrior stepping through a smoking hole in the wall. Behind him, more aliens charged in, their weapons glowing with energy. "Open fire," Cole roared. Diaz swung the minigun around and squeezed the trigger. Bullets ripped through the first wave of Gorvaks, turning the front runners into shredded meat. But more kept coming, their heavy armor absorbing some of the damage. Private Baker threw a grenade. Boom. The explosion sent alien bodies flying, but the survivors kept pushing forward. A Gorvaks warrior lunged at Jackson, swinging the massive plasma blade. Jackson barely dodged in time, firing his rifle into the alien's chest. The creature roared, stumbling but not falling. It took 3 more shots to bring it down. "We need to fall back," Lewis shouted. "We can't hold them." Cole gritted his teeth. He knew they couldn't fight forever, but they didn't need to. They just had to hold out long enough. "Keep firing," Cole ordered. "Buy me 2 minutes." As his team held the line, Cole ran to the outpost's power core. If they couldn't escape, they'd make sure the Gorvaks didn't either. He punched in the override code, setting the reactor to overload. A loud alarm blared through the outpost. "EVUR, in and out, now," Cole shouted. The squad sprinted toward the jungle as the outpost shook violently. The Gorvaks, realizing too late what was happening, roared in fury. Then, boom. The explosion lit up the night, turning the old outpost into a fireball. The shockwave sent Cole and his team flying. When they hit the ground, all they could hear was ringing in their ears. Slowly, Cole pushed himself up, looking at the burning wreckage. No more Gorvaks' laughter. No more roars. Diaz coughed. "That was one hell of a trap, Sarge." Cole nodded. The Gorvaks had walked right into it. But the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Smoke and fire filled the night sky as the remains of the outpost burned behind them. The explosion had wiped out a large number of the Gorvaks, but Cole knew better than to assume it was over. The Gorvaks never gave up that easily. Sergeant Cole quickly checked his squad. They were alive, but not unharmed. Lewis clutched his burned shoulder. Jackson had a deep cut on his forehead, and Baker limped slightly. Diaz, despite being covered in dust and bruises, was still holding onto the X-900 minigun like it was part of his own body. Cole's earpiece crackled. "Sergeant, do you copy?" It was command. Finally. "This is Cole. Outpost destroyed. Heavy enemy casualties, but we're still engaged. Request immediate extraction." There was a pause before the reply. "Negative, Sergeant. Hostile presence is too strong. We can't risk a dropship. You'll have to reach the rendezvous point, 5 kilometers north." Cole clenched his jaw. 5 kilometers through dense jungle, with an unknown number of Gorvaks still out there. It was a death march, but they had no choice. "Understood," he replied. "We're moving out." The squad moved fast, pushing through the jungle. Every step was painful, every breath heavy with exhaustion. The sounds of the burning outpost faded behind them, replaced by the eerie silence of the forest. It felt wrong. Too quiet. Then they heard it. A deep, growling sound. Not one, not two, but many. The Gorvaks were still hunting them. And this time, they weren't laughing. Cole raised his fist, signaling his team to stop. His night vision visor scanned the area. Shadows moved between the trees, fast and silent. The Gorvaks were circling them. "They're flanking us," Jackson whispered, gripping his rifle. "Let them," Cole muttered. "We'll give them a welcome they won't forget." He motioned for the team to take defensive positions, back to back, weapons ready. If the Gorvaks wanted a fight, they were about to get one. The first attack came from the left. A massive Gorvaks warrior burst from the trees, plasma blade raised. Baker fired first, hitting the alien's chest, but the armor absorbed most of the damage. The Gorvaks roared and swung. Baker barely dodged. "Diaz," Cole barked. Diaz didn't hesitate. He spun the minigun and squeezed the trigger. The jungle erupted with the sound of 3,000 rounds per minute. The first Gorvaks was torn apart in seconds. Blood and metal flew as the minigun's bullets ripped through armor and flesh alike. The jungle floor was painted red as more Gorvaks charged, only to be cut down before they could even reach the squad. The minigun kept firing, a constant stream of destruction. The Gorvaks howled in rage, realizing too late that they had walked into a slaughter. Some tried to take cover, but Diaz swung the barrel toward them, unleashing another storm of bullets. The trees shattered, branches snapped, and Gorvaks warriors fell one after another. But then, click. The minigun overheated. Smoke rose from the barrel. It needed time to cool down. "Reloading," Diaz shouted. The Gorvaks saw their chance. The survivors rushed forward, desperate to close the distance. "Hold the line," Cole yelled. The squad fired everything they had. Grenades exploded, rifles spat fire, and the air filled with the stench of blood and burning flesh. One Gorvaks made it through the gunfire, tackling Private Lewis. The two crashed to the ground, struggling for control. The alien was stronger, pinning Lewis down, claws reaching for his throat. Lewis gritted his teeth, grabbing his combat knife. With a final, desperate thrust, he plunged the blade into the Gorvaks' neck. The alien gurgled, then collapsed. Diaz's minigun cooled down just in time. He spun the barrel and fired again. The last of the Gorvaks was shredded, their bodies hitting the ground in broken heaps. Then, finally, silence. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the squad, their weapons smoking from the intense battle. Cole surveyed the carnage. Dozens of Gorvaks lay dead. They had won this fight, but they weren't safe yet. "Move," he ordered, reloading his rifle. "We still have 5 kilometers to go." The squad didn't hesitate. They had survived the ambush, but the war wasn't over. The jungle was thick with the stench of blood and gunpowder. Smoke still drifted from the overheated barrel of Diaz's X900 minigun, the weapon that had just turned a Gorvax ambush into a massacre. But there was no time to celebrate. Sergeant Cole scanned the area. The battlefield was littered with alien corpses, torn apart by human firepower. The ground was soaked with green Gorvax blood, but the jungle around them was still alive with movement. More were coming. "We need to keep moving," Cole said. "They'll send reinforcements." Diaz wiped sweat from his brow, his hand still gripping the minigun. "Let them come," he muttered. "I got plenty more for them." But Cole wasn't taking chances. The enemy was adapting. The first waves had rushed in blindly, thinking humans would break under pressure. But now they had gone silent again. That meant they were planning something. Lewis, still holding his wounded shoulder, cursed under his breath. "We can't outrun them. Sarge, not through this jungle. They know the terrain better than we do." Cole knew he was right. The Gorvax were hunters. If the squad kept running, the enemy would pick them off one by one. They had to make a stand, but on their own terms. "Find high ground," Cole ordered. "We'll make them come to us." The squad moved quickly, weaving through the jungle. Every shadow felt like a threat, every rustling leaf like a warning. The enemy was out there, watching, waiting. After 20 minutes of careful movement, they found what they needed: a rocky hill, surrounded by thick trees, with a single narrow path leading up. A perfect choke point. "This is it," Cole said. "We dig in here, they'd want us. They come through that gap." The team went to work. Diaz set up the minigun at the highest point, giving him a clear line of fire. Baker and Jackson planted explosives along the path, hidden beneath the leaves. Lewis took position in the trees, sniper rifle ready. Then they waited. The jungle was too quiet. Then, a low growl. Cole's grip on his rifle tightened. The Gorvax were coming. The first ones emerged from the trees, moving differently this time. They weren't charging. They were hunting. Their glowing eyes flickered as they moved in the darkness, spreading out, trying to flank. Cole smirked. They thought they were smart. "Detonate," he whispered. Baker pressed the trigger. Boom. The ground erupted as hidden explosives sent fire and shrapnel ripping through the Gorvax ranks. Alien bodies were thrown into the air, their screams lost in the roar of the blast. Then, the minigun opened fire. 3,000 rounds per minute tore through the jungle, cutting down anything that moved. Diaz grinned as he swept the barrel from left to right, turning the battlefield into a storm of bullets. The Gorvax roared in frustration. Their ambush had failed. Again, a massive warrior, bigger than the rest, charged through the flames. Plasma shield raised, absorbing the bullets. Diaz cursed. "He's not going down." Cole raised his rifle, aiming for the legs. "Take him out." Lewis fired. A high-powered sniper shot tore through the alien's knee. The Gorvax stumbled, just for a second. But a second was enough. Baker tossed a grenade. Boom. The alien vanished in fire and smoke. More enemies came, but the humans held the line. For every Gorvax that stepped into the kill zone, the minigun tore them apart. Grenades exploded, rifles burned hot, and screams filled the night. Then suddenly, it stopped. The jungle went silent. No more movement, no more growls. The enemy had retreated. Diaz exhaled. "We got them." Cole shook his head. "No, we bought time. That's all." He looked toward the horizon. The rendezvous point was still miles away. The jungle was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Sergeant Cole crouched behind a fallen log, scanning the darkness with sharp, battle-hardened eyes. The last attack had failed, but he knew the Gorvax weren't done. They never stopped until their prey was dead. The squad had fought like demons, holding their ground on the rocky hill. Dozens of enemy bodies lay scattered below, shredded by bullets and torn apart by explosions. But Cole wasn't fooled. This wasn't victory. This was survival. "We need to move," Cole muttered. "They'll be regrouping." Diaz adjusted the X900 minigun, its barrel still smoking. "They keep coming. We keep cutting them down. Works for me." Private Lewis shook his head. "They're learning. That last wave wasn't blind rage. They're trying to outthink us." He wiped the sweat from his face, his wounded shoulder aching. "If we keep fighting in one spot, we're dead." Cole nodded. Lewis was right. The Gorvaks had numbers, patience, and the home advantage. If the humans didn't stay ahead of them, they would be surrounded and slaughtered. "Pack up," Cole ordered. "We move fast and quiet. No gunfire unless necessary." The squad slipped into the jungle, moving like ghosts. The rendezvous point was still 3 kilometers away. The terrain was rough. Thick vines, towering trees, and uneven ground made every step dangerous. But staying still was worse. Then, a rustle in the trees. Cole froze. The squad stopped immediately, every weapon raised. The jungle held its breath. Then, movement. Fast, all around them. "Contact," Jackson whispered. "They're stalking us." Cole's grip on his rifle tightened. The hunters had become the hunted. For the first time, the Gorvaks weren't charging blindly. They were waiting, watching. They had learned. A deep, guttural clicking sound echoed through the trees. A signal. Cole's stomach turned. They weren't just being hunted. They were being herded. "Move," he snapped. "Now." The squad broke into a sprint. The jungle exploded with movement as Gorvaks warriors leaped from the trees, weapons raised. Gunfire erupted. Lewis fired his sniper rifle mid-run, dropping one enemy with a shot between the eyes. Baker tossed a grenade, the explosion lighting up the darkness. Diaz spun, raising the minigun. But before he could fire, something hit him. A Gorvaks elite, faster than the others, slammed into Diaz, sending both crashing into the dirt. "Diaz." Cole turned to help, but another enemy lunged at him. He barely dodged as a plasma blade sliced through the air where his head had been. In one swift motion, Cole raised his rifle and fired. 3 rounds to the chest, 1 to the head. The Gorvaks fell, dead before hitting the ground. Diaz was struggling, the massive alien pinning him down, claws wrapped around his throat. Cole didn't hesitate. He pulled his knife and drove it into the Gorvaks's exposed neck. The alien gurgled, blood spraying across Diaz's armor before collapsing. Diaz gasped for breath, pushing the body off him. "I owe you one, Sarge." "Shut up and run." Cole grabbed his arm and hauled him up. The squad sprinted through the trees, firing behind them as Gorvaks warriors closed in. The aliens weren't laughing anymore. They were furious. Then, light ahead. The river. Lewis shouted. Cole's mind raced. If they could reach the river, they could escape. But the Gorvaks were right behind them. "We jump," Cole ordered. No stopping. The squad burst out of the jungle and straight off the cliff. For a split second, they were weightless. Then, they hit the water. The freezing current swallowed them, pulling them downstream as the jungle above erupted with angry Gorvaks roars. The icy river swallowed them whole. The roaring current dragged the squad downstream, away from the Gorvaks ambush, but straight into the unknown. Sergeant Cole barely had time to take a breath before the water pulled him under. The world became a blur of darkness and chaos. His gear weighed him down, but he kicked hard, forcing himself to the surface. Gasping for air, he scanned the water. Where was the squad? Jackson surfaced first, coughing and struggling against the current. Lewis appeared next, clutching his rifle tightly. Baker fought to keep his head above water. But where was Diaz? "Diaz!" Cole shouted over the roar of the river. Then, a splash. Diaz burst out of the water, still gripping the X-900 minigun. He gasped, shaking the water from his face. "I am officially sick of this planet," he yelled. No time to respond. The river was taking them somewhere fast. Cole looked ahead. His blood ran cold. A sharp drop. A waterfall. "Brace for impact," he shouted. The squad barely had time to react before the river plunged over the edge. For a moment, there was nothing but free fall. Then, impact. The squad hit the lower pool hard. Cole's vision blurred as he sank beneath the surface, but he forced himself upward. They had survived. But their problems weren't over. The jungle around them was different. Thicker, darker, silent. Cole waded to the shore, pulling himself onto the muddy ground. The squad followed, coughing, drenched, and exhausted. Diaz groaned. "Tell me we're done running, Sarge." Cole's instincts screamed no. They weren't safe. Not yet. Then, a noise. A deep metallic hum. The squad turned and froze. Before them, hidden within the jungle, was something huge. A Gorvax war camp. Towers of metal and stone. Gunships parked in open bays. Crates of weapons stacked high. And in the center, a captured human dropship. Cole's heart pounded. They hadn't just escaped the Gorvax ambush. They had stumbled right into their main base. The squad crouched low behind the dense jungle foliage, staring at the Gorvax war camp. It was massive. Metal towers loomed over the jungle, searchlights scanning the perimeter. Dozens of heavily armed Gorvax warriors patrolled the area, their armor gleaming under the artificial lights. But none of that mattered, because at the center of the base, parked and intact, was a captured human dropship, their ticket home. Cole's mind raced. This was it. If they could take that ship, they could escape. But there was no way to sneak past so many enemies. They had one option. "We take the ship," Cole said, voice low but firm. Jackson let out a bitter chuckle. "You mean we fight our way through a whole damn war camp?" "That's exactly what I mean," Cole said. "We hit them hard, take the ship, and get the hell off this rock." Diaz grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Now you're speaking my language, Sarge." He patted the X-900 minigun. "They won't know what hit him." Cole nodded. "We don't have time for a long fight. We hit fast, cause chaos, and get out before they can regroup." Lewis checked his sniper rifle. "I'll take out the officers first. Cut off their chain of command." "Baker, Jackson," Cole continued. "You two plant explosives. We want them confused and panicked." "And me?" Diaz asked, already knowing the answer. Cole smirked. "You do what you do best." The squad moved like shadows, slipping through the jungle toward the enemy base. The air was thick with tension. One wrong step, one loud noise, and the mission was over before it began. Then, Cole raised his fist. "Go time." Lewis took the first shot. Crack. A Gorvax officer collapsed, a clean hole through his skull. Before the other guards could react, Baker and Jackson's explosives detonated. Boom. Fire erupted near the fuel depot, sending Gorvax warriors scrambling. Diaz opened fire. 3,000 rounds per minute ripped through the enemy ranks. Warriors fell like wheat before a scythe, their armor useless against the sheer force of high-velocity lead. The base erupted into chaos. Alarms blared. The Gorvax scrambled to respond, but the humans were already inside. "Move! Move!" Cole shouted, leading the charge toward the dropship. More Gorvax reinforcements poured from the barracks, firing plasma bolts. Jackson grunted as a shot grazed his leg. "They're bringing in heavy weapons." Cole saw it, a Gorvax gunner setting up a plasma cannon. Lewis. Crack. The sniper's bullet pierced the gunner's skull before he could fire. They reached the ship's ramp. The door was locked. "Diaz," Cole barked. Diaz slung the minigun over his back, ripping off the access panel. "Give me 30 seconds." "We don't have 30," Jackson shouted, tossing another grenade. Boom. Korvac's war cries echoed from all sides. Cole turned, raising his rifle. Hold the line. The final battle began. The squad fought like demons. Grenades exploded, bullets flew, and Korvac's bodies piled up at the base of the ramp. Then, the dropship's engines roared to life. Diaz grinned. "We're in. Go, go," Cole ordered, dragging Jackson onto the ramp. The squad scrambled inside, sealing the door as plasma fire pounded against the hull. Cole sprinted to the cockpit. The controls were in Korvac's script, but the layout was familiar enough. He grabbed the throttle and pulled. The ship lurched upward. Outside, the Korvacs howled in rage, firing everything they had. Plasma bolts sizzled against the hull, but the dropship kept rising. Come on, Cole muttered. The ship broke through the jungle canopy. Then, boom. A Korvac's missile streaked toward them. "Missile lock," Baker shouted. Cole yanked the controls hard. The dropship rolled, dodging by inches. The missile exploded behind them, sending a shockwave through the cockpit. Then, they were free. The blue sky stretched before them. The Korvac's war camp shrank below, its warriors still firing in vain. Cole exhaled, his hands shaking on the controls. They had done it. They had survived. Diaz slumped back in his seat, laughing. Never doing that again. Lewis grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. Same time next week. Cole just smiled. Let's go home.